Hello and welcome to another of MATLAB Helpers videos on stock market with MATLAB. So in this episode, we'll look at how we can code the backend for the historical data application that we want to design. So this particular episode will draw on ideas that we discussed in some previous episodes. So we'll use the functions that we saw in MATLAB and learn how we can use the same functions in App Designer. There are a few things we need to know about how to use functions in App Designer. So we'll first go through the basic components of the code view in App Designer. So for now, you will see that we have the code for the application in front of us. So it seems a bit long, but it is actually not. You will come to know that it's very easy to write the code. We have just copied and pasted the code that we had in MATLAB into App Designer. So let me just take you through one thing at a time. So let's begin by understanding what variables we'll need during this application. So we'll need a few variables that we'll need to use throughout the application across functions and across callbacks. So when we need to use a particular variable throughout callbacks or throughout functions, what we need to do is we need to declare them inside this section called properties. Now, how can you add this particular section in the code view, right? So what I will do is I'll just create a new app in App Designer to show you how we can add a new section for properties. So I'll just go into this plus in the property section, and you will see that as I click on plus, a section for properties has been made for me within the code view. Now here you can describe any kind of property you want. So for instance, if I want to declare a property called frequency, I can just write frequency, and I can write a description telling me what that particular variable is for. For instance, I can tell it that frequency of the data. All right. Similarly, you will see that in the application I have made, we have frequency to store the frequency of data. We have ticker variable to store the company ticker. We have s to start date, end date will be saved in edate, and we will save the table data in the variable tdata. Now we have also used a property called calling app. Now this particular component is something that we'll discuss in future episodes, so we'll just forget that we have this particular variable in our code for now. So moving on to the next section, you will see that after the section for properties, we have the section for functions. Now before we go into functions, I'd like to mention here that the properties we have defined here are not public. So these variables can only be accessed within this particular application only. Okay, so if you want certain variables to be accessible outside this application, what you can do is you can go into this drop-down menu over here and make a section for a public property. Now within public property, we can add those variables which we want to be accessible outside this particular application for stock historical data as well. So since we do not need any such properties for now, I'll just remove this section. Now let's just go into learning about functions, all right? So just like properties, we can add a new function by going into the function section in code browser and clicking on plus. Okay, now again, there are two kinds of functions we can create. One is private, the other is public. The private functions are only accessible within the application in which they are declared, and public functions are accessible outside the app as it's mentioned over here. So the description of these functions is good enough for you to understand what they can be used for. So now when I made a function, I'll see that I have got the output name, so I can just make it output, and the function name, so I can make it function name. So here we'll write the function name, and here we'll have the variable that we want to pass on to some other variable in the main code. So this will be the variable that will be passed on. Now, every function in App Designer actually has an input argument called app. Now, we cannot create any functions in App Designer without this argument app. So we'll have to define any function we want to use with this particular input argument always. Now, we can obviously add new input arguments to the functions. For instance, if I want to add some more arguments, I'll just use arg1 and arg2. All right. So I can add more arguments to the function's call, but I will always have to use this app in the beginning of the input argument. So similarly, when the function is called in the main code, we'll always have to call it with this app input argument in the beginning. So we'll look into that in a short while as to how we can actually call functions in App Designer. So let's just now look into the function that we have made to read data from the Yahoo Finance website. As you will see that this code is the same code as the one we used in MATLAB. So we have just copied the code within this function called readdata. I have named it readdata. You can name it anything you want to name it. By anything, I mean anything appropriate. And there are some rules for naming functions. You cannot have a function that starts with a numerical value. There are some characters which are not allowed within the naming convention in MATLAB, and if you try to use it as a function name, you will get an error. So we begin by specifying the URL. All right. So you will see that the URL is not like the one we had in MATLAB, right? And that's because we have broken down the URL into several parts over here. So after the main bit of the URL, which specifies that we are looking data in the Yahoo Finance website, we had the value for the company symbol or the company ticker value. Okay, so this is the value that the user will enter. So that's why we have mentioned that value over here, and this particular company ticker will be saved in the variable called ticker, right, which we declared over here in this section. Now this ticker value will be what the user will choose from if we go to the design view here from the ticker drop down menu. Now while accessing any of these variables that we have declared within the properties section, we'll have to use the term app dot in front of it. That is to make it usable throughout this application. So whichever variable we have declared within the section for properties, we'll have to add app dot in front of it. So this is kind of a structural format for accessing variables. We need to use app in front of any property we declare in the properties section. All right, so we'll save the company ticker value in app.ticker. Similarly, we'll save the start date in app.sdate and the end date here as well in edate. And then we'll have the interval and frequency in app.frequency. All right, so we have just replaced the individual values, the fixed constant values that we had in the MATLAB code with the variables which can actually allow for variable values here. Now we have used num to str in front of the date values because we need to convert them to a string value, because we are concatenating a string in the URL, right? So what we'll do is we'll just convert this number, which is the start date or the end date, to a string so that it can be combined to make one URL. Alright, so I have just used these dots over here to move code to the next line and make it more readable. Okay, so after the URL has been specified, the rest of the code is the same. We'll save the URL, we will read the URL by using the function webRead. After that, we'll split the function, the page source we have in the temp variable, and we'll then separate the important bit from the unimportant bit. Okay, so After all this, what we will do is we'll convert that into a table over here. We are converting our data into a table, and before that we are converting the date that we have in the Unix time format to a date time format. Okay, so the entire method or the user functions is the same. Only the thing changed here is the URL, in which so that now we can have the user choose more than one company and choose any frequency according to his wishes. Okay, so that's about the function to read the data. Now we'll move on to the function that allows us to display the data in a table. Okay, so if you look into the properties for the UI table or the data table as we have named it, you will find that there's a component called data over here, right? So the data in a table is saved in this particular component. Okay, so what we can do is we'll just access this particular feature by using the dot notation as always. So app dot data table dot data equals to app dot tdata. All right. Even when accessing any component name within App Designer, we will have to add this term app and then dot. Okay, so app. So we are accessing the component for data within the application app, and we are accessing the data within the table. Okay, so after that we are saving the data we have in app dot tdata variable as the data for the table. So to reiterate, we are saving the value or the data that we have in the variable app.tdata. In other words, we are saving the variable app.tdata and we are displaying it in the table, data table, by using the feature data of that table. All right. After that, we are naming the column names. Okay, so the column name of these of data will be based on the column name of the variable app.tdata. All right, so we can access the column names of this particular variable, which is actually a table variable, table type variable, by using the features variable names, which is actually a part of the properties of tdata. So we'll write app.tdata.properties.variable names. Okay, so this will give us access to the names of the columns of the table in app.tdata, and then we are naming or making those names the same for the table, data table. Okay, so this thing will become more clearer when I run the application. All right. So after this, we have the function actually to plot the data in the axes.